The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
Hey, Church Planter, this is Peyton Jones, and I'm a ninja.
And this is Pete Mitchell, and I'm a ginger.
And you're listening to the Church Planter Podcast.
I'm a ginger.
I'm a ninja, and I'm a ginger. You know this all started because I was sent a picture by Ben Bisco, my intern. You heard him a few weeks ago on here. And he sent me a picture, and it was Ginger Ninja. And he was like, this is you and Pete as a drink. So it was pretty funny.
You know what's funny is calling a redhead a ginger is one of the most offensive things you can do to a ginger.
Yeah. Like, and luckily he didn't call you that. He just said if we were a
but
drink.
like even me saying and I'm a ginger, to me I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm assaulting myself. I feel unclean.
I know. When I sent it to you, I had to write Oklahoma. Which is our safe word if you don't know. Like when you've crossed a line. Speaking of crossing the lines, you and
by
I
the
were
way,
talking,
guys, we have to use our safe word quite a lot with each other.
So speaking of crossing a line, we were talking the other day about the fact, or actually this morning, that I may have an opportunity on this podcast and my other podcast, Ministry Ninja, cha-ching, to interview Chuck Swindoll. So I kind of got this alarm bell in my head maybe 6 weeks, 2 months ago. It was about a month before Warren Wiersbe died that you need to interview Warren Wiersbe. And I never did. Now that's killing me. So I've been pursuing an interview with Chuck Swindoll. And I mean, I already lost R.C. Sproul, probably the greatest Christian mind of our time. I think he was our C.S. Lewis of this generation, and we lost him. So there's so many other people I would have loved to interview. But we were talking about the question at the end. Pete goes, only if I get to do the question, which is...
if you were to get into a fist fight with you and blank, who would win?
That's where we're like, who do we make them fight? Like,
I was thinking, do Billy Graham 1975. I say we got to start picking people from time periods
well, that was my favorite one that we ever did was when we picked Billy Graham circa because it was like it wasn't fair to make him do Lion and Winter Billy Graham 90 something years old. We had to pick like strapping Hulk of a man Billy, right. Like, hey, Andrew, you can't look at him too long on the TV screen, Billy Graham, hunka burning evangelist. It was kind of like,
I've never heard anyone describe Billy Graham that way. I'm actually a little bit disturbed by that image.
Yes, such things are forbidden. But, it's funny because forbidden, indeed. Which is even worse if you don't know this. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, and we're sorry. This is where we add a little sunshine.
Every time, welcome, and we're sorry that you made it here.
It's so funny because you're a marketer, right? Like, you're never supposed to apologize. You're supposed to be like, hey, welcome to the, baddest, church planter podcast in the land. And you're supposed to, like, make it like how awesome you are.
Well,
and we
even this
know.
morning, you were comparing our podcast to another podcast that shall go unnamed, and you were like, ours is so much better, and we got way better numbers. And I'm like, yeah, ours is kind of the best.
See, that's the marketing. So what I totally dig about you, man. Rod Tidwell, not going to make me do it. But, I was thinking like, when we were talking about Ginger Ninja, this is where it comes full circle now. That would be a question that would be highly inappropriate to ask a guest of that stature. Like, could you imagine, like, okay, if you were a beer, Chuck Swindoll, what beer would you be? Right? Like, you couldn't ask that question, right? That would just
I would love for you to have asked Rick Warren, are you a ginger ninja?
Oh, Ginger Ninja.
I think
or introduce him as such.
Oh.
Hey, we're here with the Ginger Ninja, the radical that put the radical, or he put the rad and radicalis, I mean, we could just go on and on and on about, yeah. He's the yuppie whisperer. We could, we could just go on and on. Oh, it would be so good,
Yeah.
What was the guy that he targeted? Rick Warren. I'm a huge Rick Warren fan, by the way. This is not meant with disrespect.
What do you mean?
What was the profile that he had? Something Bob or
Saddleback Sam.
Saddleback Sam. Yeah. Yeah, we'd have to just take all of his monikers, kind of like on The Hobbit when he's like, "I am the man that lives from under the mountain. I am the barrel rider. He who he lists off like 20 different names, and we'd have to do that with him. Maybe I'll do that with Swindoll because
I think it'd be awesome because we can't get
he's funny.
We can't get Rick Warren to do our podcast. We've tried. We tried the magazine. We tried. I mean. They're like, Pete, we remember your phone and the turn-by-turn directions, the Cougar.
Oh, yes. In meeting with his assistants in way back when we started, and we got that invitation to, the Emerald Palace, where nobody sees the wizard, but I mean, we got in there and, it was like we had which we accidentally ended up having dinner with Rick Warren for about three or 4 hours, you and me and a table of about 4 other lucky dudes. And, but that day we're sitting in that office, Steve Gladen it was, right? And a couple other guys, I think, one of the other guys, I ended up interviewing him a couple times. He's super awesome. But, Pete's
I had this GPS at the time that you could like have these different voices, and so I paid the $2.
We were new back then. Pete was slightly a little more unsanctified in those days.
I had the Cougar voice is what it was called. It was like, "Hey, turn right now."
Oh gosh!
Make a U-turn, and
it would say things like, "Are you still there, Tiger?" And I think what it said.
I think it did. Well, because what happened was we got there, but like their church is so big that like the final destination isn't actually where the door is. It's like I don't know, the driveway or something. And
it's the size of Disneyland. They literally he literally bought the Disneyland trams, the old ones, like the yellow and blue ones.
Okay, yeah,
those
I know
are
they did
actually,
that for parking. Yeah.
No, those he actually bought those. That's where those are. If you ever wonder what happened to the old ones, they're there.
So we're in this meeting, and all of a sudden it's like, "Are you still there, big boy?"
Oh gosh! And Pete turns a million shades of red.
I died, and I don't think I've ever used that voice again. I don't even remember the app that it was on. I was just like, I can't show my face, and they were laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing ever. And
what's super funny, I remember a couple things. I remember them being super cool, and I remember Steve Gladen had on his desk a plastic lagoon. Do you remember that with palm trees and everything?
No.
And the lagoon was filled with M&Ms. And I just noticed, I guess because I was looking at it for a long time and thinking, I really want one of those M&Ms, but it seems like an important meaning. I think you don't reach out and just take an M&M. And it probably seems like a 5-year-old if you ask, "Can I have one of your M&Ms?" Maybe it's a test. Maybe that's on the desk to like test my willpower, and I'm probably failing this test. Maybe I should ask. Maybe it's a man that doesn't see his life by the tail that doesn't grab that M&M. I don't know. It was the M&M test, and I'm sure I failed it.
And I like how you didn't spend any time thinking about it.
It's funny though, because I was so I was pretty raw. I was a missionary. I had just gotten back, and we laughed when we got out because I go, "Hey, I'm not very good with business people, am I, or like important people?" Because I literally they're small talking, and I just go, "Okay, guys, well, hey, we drove a while to get here. What's this all about?"
Hey, I say go for it.
I remember just seeing the look of shock on their faces, and then they quickly recovered and go, "Hey, we just wanted to get to know who you guys were. We saw what you're doing."
At least they didn't say, "You called this meeting."
We didn't though.
No,
they actually said, "Hey," and that was kind of cool. It was back in the day, and I think we were just small potatoes. And
that was back before people listened to the podcast. Because now that they listen to it, we don't get those calls anymore. We don't get "Hey, can you please come out here and meet with us?"
Yeah, we pretty much get
at least I don't. I don't get the invite. Maybe you do. I don't know.
Not from important people anymore. I mean, the little guys, you know who you are out there, the little people.
The little guys, you know who you are. Only little guys listen to this piddly little podcast.
It's funny about our audience because only our audience can get abused the way that we abuse them. It's funny.
Well, that's because we pretty much abuse ourselves as well. Hey, guess what I get to do today? I get to go to the DMV.
Nice.
Yeah, got to renew the driver's license.
Oh.
So, yeah. Yeah.
That sucks, dude.
Yeah. By the way, have you had to do that yet?
Renew my driver's license. Yes, I did when I got back and from the UK.
Okay, no, but when's your next one due? Because the next one is the one where you got to get either the real ID or the federal limit supply ID.
Oh, I don't know.
When's it expire? When's your license expire? Probably next year.
Gosh, probably. Let me see. I'll look now.
Because by October 1st of 2020, you have to have a real ID in order to board a plane in the U.S.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's June 2020, man.
Yeah. So.
So I have to have that done before it because I'm going to Wales probably about a month.
You're going to need. Yeah. So I have all my documentation. You got to prove, like, you need a passport. You need proof that you live where you say you live. You need your social security card. I mean, there's like, I literally have a packet of stuff I got to go in with. Right. Because I need a real ID because you can't buy firearms without a real ID.
I don't know these things.
Did we lose you?
No, I'm here. I don't.
Well, you know how important firearms to Pete Mitchell. Like,
well,
the federal limit supply ID will not allow me to buy firearms.
Oh, well, that's kind of a big deal for you.
It kind of is.
We're talking today about. Go ahead and announce our topic.
Well, it was actually brought up. I honestly, this is another topic that I don't know that it's going to take more than 5 minutes to discuss. But one of our listeners reached out to both of us on Facebook and said, "Hey, I think you ought to do an episode on the mass shootings and, what our response should be or something like that." And so I was like, I don't know how to take more than 5 minutes on that, but yeah.
Well, so, I guess we got more smack. I wonder if today's a day where we ought to just jump in because of this is a sticky one.
Well, it's just yeah. Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, as it should be. Yeah. I mean, whenever you're seeing whenever you see people killed, it's disturbing. But when you see them mowed down for what appears to be no better reason than this is how I get famous.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what some of them seem to be, though. We recently had a mass stabbing in Garden Grove, I don't know, a week and a half ago, something like that. That was done with a machete. And that one was not done out of, this is how I become famous. That one was done out of anger and pure evil in the heart. So, but the bottom line is it's such a, it's like the third rail of politics right now. Because you've got the people like me who are, big firearms enthusiasts. And then you got people who are like, well, I think we should just ban everything. And I think there's a big disagreement on what the core issue is. And that's a big part of the discussion. But it's a sensitive subject. I mean, when you have a loved one who's killed, you're upset, but I mean, I can't even fathom having a loved one that's killed just randomly, because they happen to be shopping at Walmart or, they just happen to be going to Home Depot or, they were at the strip mall, whatever it is. It's one of those things.
The guy I was camping with was, he lived in Corona and he was,
was he there for the San Bernardino?
He was there earlier that day at that Costco.
Oh,
which
with
I
the
wondered
Costco.
about.
Okay,
Yeah, because when I've been to that Costco with Eric before. There's a Best Buy. It's all I can't remember what freeway it's.
So for our friends who live in other parts of the country, there were actually 2 shootings, I believe, at the same Costco the same day.
Right.
In Corona or Riverside. They weren't connected, but they both happened at the same place.
Right.
And stop playing with your computer. I can hear you.
I know you can hear my clicking.
I can hear you clicking. Click, 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 click. And so anyway, let me kick us off a little, Doc Brown, and then we'll get into the topic.
All right.
Great Scott! It's time for this week's topic.
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
So what? Let me start off by saying, what are your thoughts as ministers, as ambassadors of the gospel? Let me get your opinion. Like, where do you think we start?
I mean, really, just to start off, to say that we're in an age and a time where, I mean, this is unprecedented. The ability to go in and mow multiple people down. It's not like the old days where you'd pick up a sword or and you could be overpowered, or if you were, I mean, almost every time in the past, you didn't have a way to mow down multiple people fast. And, even like in the days of the cowboys and stuff, I was just in Bodie, which was one of the most violent wild western mining towns.
For me, I just got to kind of bring us back to reality. Actually, yeah, we have.
Well, okay, so in mass warfare, yes, but not.
No, I'm not even talking about mass warfare. Look at the big shooting that we had in the '60s with the dude up in the tower who killed 30 people with the bolt action rifle.
Right. So yes, growing up, we had that, and we had people, quote unquote, going postal, where that came from, where a guy would hop up on top of the building. But what I mean is, it's really snowballed. I mean, these are happening, far more frequently, whereas we referenced the part in the 60s, and it was kind of like it stands like a mountain peak. The first time a school shooting happened on the scale of Columbine, it rocked the world, and we knew that we had crossed the threshold. It's kind of like 9/11, where you cross these thresholds and you say, okay, we're in a new era now. And I do think, you rightly point out, these things have happened before. There have been massacres in times past, but
yeah, and I think really, though, to me, because as I look at what has happened over the last 100 years, we're actually seeing less gun deaths than in the past.
Right.
But what has changed today is the information world we live in, the access to information. It's no longer just you have 3 channels on TV. We now have worldwide coverage. Yeah. And so we do hear about these things. Like, there have been a lot of mass shootings at schools prior to Columbine, but most of the time they happen in gang-infected schools.
Right.
And so we kind of just said, oh, well, that's those people. And that
true.
Was the attitude. And once it happened to white kids, it was like, yep. Oh, wait a second. This isn't supposed to. I mean, and so
my nephew, and I'll give him a shout out. He doesn't listen, but his name's Tadis, and he is probably one of the smartest dudes I know.
Your nephew is because I've met your nephew, and I'm like, that is one man I would not want to fight.
He is
yoked.
Huge.
Oh my gosh.
He is huge. I mean, he's massive. When you first meet him, you're like, oh, I hope he's nice. He's
right.
humongous. He's a monster.
Please don't hit me. Please don't hit me, sir.
But he's also extremely smart. He says the funniest stuff to me. He's like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm coming down with a cold. And he's like, I don't get sick much. And I'm like, oh really? He's like, yeah, man, it's bred out of me. He's like, back in the slavery days, my great-great-grandfather was a slave. And he's like, men like me were bred. And he's right. He's like, I'm a workhorse. That's what I was made for, And but he'll say oh yeah, the conditions my ancestors said, it built up an immunity, and he's basically letting you know, hey, white boy, you're a snowflake, you're a powder puff. I'm way tougher than you because I was bred to be. And it's funny though, because he is one of the smartest dudes that I know. He's got a master's. He's getting ready to do his PhD, but he is incredibly smart. And he was the first guy I ever heard that from. He said, he goes, this has been happening because he grew up in, Compton, Watts, different neighborhoods and different parts of LA. And he now works in inner city LA with troubled youth. And that's what he does during his day job. He leads a special program for kids coming out of gangs, or maybe their home life isn't right or whatever. And his mission is to rescue kids. He himself has done time for manslaughter, yada yada. But he is he's a man that I greatly respect, and it's really cool to look at your nephew and just be like, dude, I'm kind of in awe of you because you're an amazing dude. Like you're a man that I'm proud of, and proud to call my family, proud to call my nephew. But he's interesting because he likes to make people think. And the first time he ever said to me, hey, this has been happening in my neighborhoods, for years, for decades. And Columbine was nothing new to me,
Right.
He goes,
yep.
and that perspective rocked me. He goes, but now it happens to white people. And Bono brought up the same thing that, if you hear that 35,000 plus kids starve to death today, you're not bummed about it because you're like, oh, and this is Bono now. I'm not making a statement like I'm not bummed about it. I'm saying, and I got to be careful here. Bono said, if those were white kids, we would have a different response. And he makes a good point.
Oh yeah. We actually, for those of you who don't know, I've got another podcast that I do with, another church planter. He's the real church planter, not like this fake Peyton guy. Dan Sams. It's called From Concealment. We actually just launched it this week. You can find the first 3 episodes online, so go check it out. From Concealment Podcast. I'm hoping Apple actually approves it. We're kind of like, I don't know if Apple's going to approve it because, it's a gun podcast and they don't really like gun podcasts.
Right.
But yeah, we were talking about that actually on the latest episode that you guys won't hear for a couple more weeks. About how there is absolutely racism in the United States. Like all these guys are out there, oh, there's no more racism in the U.S. Baloney. There's totally racism. And I've told you this, man, because your daughters are part black and part, different Filipino. And what's you got a
Hispanic, black, and Filipino. And white.
And so I was just like, there are places in this country that as your daughters get older, I would not want them to go, especially by themselves.
Right.
Because the cops are some of the most racist people you'll meet. And I'm not saying all cops are racist. Please, guys, let's turn this into that kind of a thing. But my only point is there is absolutely racism that still happens in the United States, for sure.
For sure.
And like even your nephew, you brought this up on one of our podcasts. He's like, hey, when I get pulled over by a cop, I'm like putting my hands out the window on top of the roof of my car. And, I'm doing whatever it takes to make that cop feel safe.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I look at that and I'm like, as a white guy, I've never had that thought before.
Right.
Yeah.
You pull over and hey, I'm a law abiding. He knows he has to put his hand outside the vehicle because he's so intimidating, and he has to say, hey, officer, I don't mean any trouble. I'll get you everything you need. He has to change his tone. He has to put his hands on outside the window on top of the roof, and he holds that pose. He gets out in front of it, and he actually says, I know what I look like. I know I'm a bit intimidating. I'm going to comply fully, and that's what he has to.
But he's smart enough to actually do that, and has the temperament to humble himself to do that.
Right.
Because people should be rightly offended that they have to do that. I believe they should be offended that I even have to be this way. I don't think that people should have to be that way, but the reality is, you're going to get shot by a cop and they're going to get off. Like
the possibility of him getting shot is much higher. And not only that, he has 4 boys. And he'll often say, I have to model this for my boys so they understand.
Oh, see, that's even smarter, man. Oh my gosh, that's great. Yeah. So anyway, but back to what you were talking about with, this, now we're seeing this stuff a lot more. And how do we address that as a church? How do we address it as, people in ministry? Give me some of your thoughts.
Well, the first thing is, our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? And by that, I'm not saying that we don't have a battle in these, because we're going to get into that. What do you do? What if that comes knocking on your church door? It's a possibility. And so particularly, sometimes churches are targeted. So it's a probability. It's not just a possibility. The reality is that, this is an evil that stalks the earth now. And that's kind of the point I'm making. This is something that our forefathers didn't think about. It's something that ministers of the past didn't have to deal with. They didn't have to wrestle with questions like internet and internet porn. They didn't have to wrestle with mass shootings in the way that we do. So these are topics that when you're talking about a church plant, are you going to have something in place? How are you going to deal with it? So first off, I think the shallowest consideration is social media. I'm not involved, so I think it becomes like, if we tackle it, we can kind of go, if we think of the levels of involvement as like concentric circles, we start with the outer circle. I hear about it on the news. What's my response as a minister of the gospel? How do I react to this online? Because that's where, the marketplace is nowadays, both literally and figuratively, so to speak, where everybody's congregated on social media. So how do I interact online with this? How do I, kind of get involved, and what's helpful and what's unhelpful? For example, I would say some of the unhelpful things I see is when somebody just goes, see, nothing's ever going to change. That's why the world needs Jesus. I'm always like, dude, like, not now, like, that's like going to a funeral and kind of standing up when they ask, does anyone have anything to say? Yeah, this guy wouldn't have died so early if he hadn't been smoking,
Yeah.
Like, you don't do that, Hey, we all know he wasn't the smartest of characters, Like, okay, cool. So while the world is in confusion and pain and suffering, just go ahead and, throw at them that this is your fault because you don't have Jesus. That's what it feels like, to be honest. To me, I'm standing back going, you're kind of being a jerk.
Yeah,
I know you mean well. I know you think, like, nobody's reading your tweet or your Facebook post and going, oh, that's my problem. This happened. That guy loaded a gun because I don't have Jesus. Nobody's saying that. And also when you say that, it's so out of proportion, it doesn't make sense to people. This is the disconnect that happens when you're just around church people. Nobody understands. Like, my neighbors don't understand, like, how does having Jesus mean that that's not going to happen? Are you saying that it's going to be like, if I accept Jesus, all the world around me is this giant utopia and problems don't happen? Like, unicorns poop jelly beans in front of me everywhere I go, and, I fart rainbows. What are you talking about?
Right.
So that's one of the ways. Another of the ways that I think is unhelpful is engaging in the narrow debates on it. I believe that for us in this hour, in even in the first century, Paul said, be careful how you walk amongst outsiders, as wise and not as unwise, right? That whole idea, and when he's talking about be careful how you walk, he's talking about your conversation, everything. He starts talking about how you answer people, with grace, seasoned with salt. You have to, grace has to permeate everything that you say. There are times I hold back on social media because everybody, it's kind of like that old adage that Opinions are like anuses. Everyone has one. Sorry to be crude, but the statement's actually a little bit cruder than that. But
you could have said they're like armpits. Everyone's got them. Some of them don't smell
that's
too
what
good.
I usually say. That's what now.
Come on, clean it up. This is a church planter podcast.
It's a medical term, though.
Oklahoma.
RN. Everybody's got an opinion, and unfortunately, in our country, we excel in giving opinions before we have all the facts. And it's pure emotion and very little logic that is the name of the game and rules the game on Facebook and social media. So when I find people tangling, and really getting into it, it seems to me like a failure to listen, a failure to hear. So I observe a lot. I hear what people are saying. I want to know what people's fears and hopes and expectations are in life. I'm still learning from the human race. Because, it's kind of like Spurgeon said, if you want to become a good preacher of the gospel, you must study humanity. They must be your first textbook, outside of the Bible. And that's true. You have to study the word and you have to study men. And so, but I don't tend to let public opinion and the argument that's happening, I don't let other people frame the conversation that I want to have. So I think about it, I pray about it, and occasionally I will enter the fray and give some. It's very rare that I'll share something political. And when I do, usually somebody wants to make the conversation what they want it to be. Remember that time I quoted not long ago the guy, I'm trying to remember who it was, the guy that wrote Upton Sinclair, right? Was it? No, it wasn't him. It was someone else. I don't remember who it was. And he was just saying, something about, I don't remember who it was. Could have been Orson Welles. I don't remember, but it was an author. It was actually an author. And it was something about, with socialists, it's not so much that they love the poor as much as they hate the rich. And I thought it was it was someone who was himself a socialist. And he was being honest, and he was reflecting that, hey, this is a weakness of our movement. And I shared it, and people went nuts over that. And this one guy decided to troll the whole thing, and he got chewed up and spit out by most people watching. But it was just like, dude, what happens is it becomes what it's not about. And to me, what on social media, my job as a minister of the gospel is to minister to people's pain first. It's kind of like when Jesus tells a parable, the Good Samaritan, who's a good neighbor. Well, when you find a guy broken and lying on the ground, you go over and you bind up his wounds, you put him on your horse, and you take him to an inn, and you pay his fare. There are people broken and bleeding on the side of on the side of the road during this time. And our responsibility is to go and minister to them and to heal them and to be that good neighbor first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
I know I'm kind of like doing all the talking here.
No, I'm curious, okay, so let's step up the conversation to
let's go to the next ring. Let's go deeper in.
Yeah. What do you see?
Or as Tolkien said, further up and further on.
And we've kind of talked about this a little bit on the podcast before. Here's kind of my take on it, and I want to be careful how I say this because you can say things on one side of a tragedy that may not actually come true when you're in the middle of it. So people who listen to the podcast know that I have a concealed carry weapons permit. I carry a firearm pretty much all the time. If you see me in public, assume I have at least one firearm and one extra magazine on me at all times. You can assume it, and you're probably going to be right. And part of that is because I can, right? I mean, we live in a country where we're all supposed to be able to do that, though some states like mine which, by the way, my assistant Travis was listening to our podcast that Dan and I do because he was the one setting it all up in iTunes.
Right.
And he voxes me and he goes, I'd really like to hear that somebody starts a drinking game for every time you mention that California is communist and not a free state. Everyone takes a drink. So I just happen to live in a not free state, but I live in a free-ish county, which is why I was able to get a permit. And we've talked about this on the podcast in the sense that, okay, my personal take is this. If you come after my family, I'm not going to have any problem putting you down.
Right.
I mean, that's just, I'm not even going to think twice about it. I'm going to be like, look, my family's in danger. I gotta do what God has put me there to do, which is protect my family.
Right.
And I'm going to do that.
Okay.
And I'm going to deal with the consequences afterwards. You know, in California, you're going to go to jail. I don't care if it's justified. You're at least spending a night minimum in jail, period.
Right.
And probably going to have to fight for your life on trial because it's California. They don't like the fact that my county issues permits, and they'd rather you die, actually. I mean, it's kind of sad, but that's just California for you. If, like, and I work security at my church, so once a month, my job is to protect the kids. And part of the reason why they gave me that job and worked me into the rotation is because I'm legally allowed to carry, and I do carry, and they know it. So they have me do that. And again, you come after those kids, hey, I got a job here to protect them, and I'm going to protect them. If I was alone, like let's just say I'm alone at a rest stop, no one else is in danger, I don't know what I would do, because my own personal theory is, okay, if I die,
If he dies,
I know,
he dies.
Yeah,
Sorry.
little Rocky Four there. I know what's going to happen to me. I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
And maybe that gives that guy a little bit longer to come to know Jesus. If I shoot him dead and he doesn't know Jesus, that's a one-way ticket to hell, right?
Right.
Now I can say that on this side of that. What would I actually do in that scenario? Would I immediately go for protect myself? What if I don't protect him and then that guy goes on to kill other, or if I don't, stop the threat, as we say in our training, I allow the guy to kill me. I don't even bother pulling because I'd rather give that guy a chance to live. But then he goes on to kill more people. Well, now I've done another. So, I mean, it's like you can say all this stuff you want on this side of it. What's going to actually happen in the moment? I can't honestly say, what I would do. I mean, I'd like to think that I would rather die than send someone to hell. But if other people are in danger, I think you got to side for the other people, right? You got to look.
Yeah. I mean, we are called to defend others, and Jesus, he was a defender of the weak. I mean, he's very much portrayed as that, particularly in Luke's gospel, and also in Mark. You have him really defending people that can't defend themselves against Pharisees and other things. But, when it comes to, it's funny because somewhere the church has swallowed this idea of pacifism, that we need to be pacifists. And if you've ever, studied a little bit about Bonhoeffer came to realize that he couldn't just be a pacifist. He couldn't just decide, I'm just going to do nothing because, the kingdom. So he became, some people say, oh no, he didn't, but he did. He allowed his phone to be used for underground activity, counter. He was very close to the assassination attempt. I believe, I'm rusty, I read this stuff in high school, Bonhoeffer biography. Not the new one by Eric Metaxas, which is on my list, but Bonhoeffer was, he came to realize he wasn't directly, involved, but he was allowing his phone to be used by one of his relatives to help orchestrate that plot. And that's what led to his imprisonment, was the connection. And he writes about that hey, in the face of that kind of evil, you have to do something. You can't just do nothing, right? Like and there's that old adage that the only thing that evil needs to prevail is when good men simply do nothing. Right. And it's funny to me, the further we get away from world wars, the World War I and World War II, where there was mass evil going on, that and I find it so funny today that we're in this time where people say, oh, well, it's very trendy. I walked into a gaming store where it used to be like good versus evil in these war games, and I was a nerd store, and I walk in there and I said, oh, like the undead, they're the evil ones. I'm explaining to my 6-year-old that, hey, and my 10-year-old that, these are the good guys. They're the angelic warriors, and these are the bad guys. If anyone's played this new Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, it's like the new thing. They got rid of all the dwarves and elves, and now it's just like, Stormborn Eternals. They're like angelic beings. And I'm like, oh, those are the good guys. And the guy goes, well, it depends on your perspective. And he spews off this thing about, from the undead perspective. And when he finished his great spiel, I looked at my daughter and said, so basically those are the good guys and those are the bad guys. And it was just kind of like, yeah, dude, nice try. And that's cool. You're trying to be enlightened, but there is such a thing as good and evil.
Yeah.
And Tolkien, you cannot say you love Tolkien. You cannot say you're an appreciator of The Lord of the Rings without understanding that that's what he was saying. And World War II, they just came out the movie about how he fought in World War I, and that greatly influenced him. And then World War II, these things were huge on his mind. The idea of a colossal evil that Europe was not ready for. You see, Europe was way ahead. They're where we are now, believing that, it's because after World War I, everyone was disenchanted. That's where you had like Jean-Paul Sartre and others that they just, there was this idea, it's the whole postmodern thing that our foundations have been ripped apart. We no longer believe in good and evil. Then World War II strikes. And oh yeah, there is still evil in the world. World War II for Europe was the cure that there is still an evil in the world. It was almost like the cure for postmodernism in that sense. It didn't lead to an existential crisis of, let's return back to God, but it was an existential crisis. It did definitely lead to this idea that now we know there's evil, but we can't explain it, right? It's in man. And so Tolkien writes his masterpiece to say there is evil in man, but there's also good in the world. And this is where it comes from. And the whole thing is kind of an appeal to the image of God in man and to finding God in unexpected places. That's the whole reason he picks The Hobbit. There's a huge allegory, about Christianity on and off all the way throughout it. But there's a clear good versus evil thread. And what I'm saying is we get to this point now where eventually people are going to start saying, well, from the shooter's perspective, he was right too. And we'll get there. We're not there yet.
Oh, you really think?
I do. I think we're going to get there eventually. I am shocked.
You know what?
People defend Hitler. I am shocked that people defend now things that in the past, and they're trying to be enlightened. And you'll find this, that, hey, from Hitler's perspective, people will bring this stuff up. It's crazy.
I actually wrote an article in my marketing newsletter. I don't remember if this was the title, but this was the gist. Evil people never see themselves as the villain.
Correct.
Hitler never saw himself as the villain.
No.
Osama bin Laden never saw himself as the villain. Never.
They both saw themselves as saviors.
As the hero. They always see themselves as the hero.
Yep.
And
it's like this Jeff Bezos, not Jeff, who's the guy recently that killed himself in prison? The guy that had the sex trafficking ring. And
he didn't kill himself. It was Hillary. She snuck into his cell and killed him.
Yeah. Who in the heck knows? But here's the deal, right?
Well, so Hillary knows. She was there.
So
here's the internet. I love the internet.
Oh gosh. But that guy also, he saw himself as saving the human race by doing that was the lie he had told himself, is he is saving the human race by doing all. And it's gross. I don't even want to get into it, but but here's the deal, right? Because you're going a little bit further than I wanted to go at this stage, but I guess we opened the can of worms, and that is what to do when it hits your church. The next circle I was going to go into was,
yes, please.
What do I do when it's in my city? Right. So like the church in Aurora, Colorado that you and I talked with, where it was, it was a tragedy that happened. What does the church do during those times? And one of the things that churches are really good about during those times is opening up counseling, kind of being there, holding vigils, saying, hey, we're here for you during this time. And again, it's that biblical concept of mourning with those who mourn. And of course, when people come into your space, they're going to hear, they're going to watch, they're going to see what you model about how you turn to the Lord in this. But it's not just a quick internet, this is what happens when you don't follow Jesus, or Jesus is the only answer. Gosh, I don't get that, like that doesn't help me. But mourning with those who mourn, rejoicing with those who rejoice. That's the key. And so churches are really good about that when it hits their city and their community. And town meetings, being a voice there, speaking up at those things. Obviously, everybody knows that you love Jesus. Everybody knows that you think Jesus is the answer. But it's just not the thing that you say in that situation. Right? What you do is you offer to serve, because people don't want to listen to you. And I always tell people that you have to earn the right to be heard. And I'm actually proud of the church in these situations, because I've known many people that have been right there in the city, because of, some of our contacts, Pete, doing this over the years. We've been able to be, up and close with people, like the gentleman who was in the theater during the Aurora shooting. We bumped into him in the early days. And did we interview him? I think we did, didn't we?
We did, and it was a video interview, and I don't know if it made it in the magazine or what. I honestly don't remember, because that was also back when we were like learning how to use the equipment. I'm not sure if it recorded the audio, because I know some of those interviews it didn't. So but that was, because I remember where it was when we interviewed him.
So I'll quickly go past that, because I think that's something that the church does very, very well, and to tell those stories. What I don't like that I saw during one of the recent tragedies, and I'll be very vague about it, was where it got overly done, where it was letting your good deeds, parading your good deeds in front of men. There was a tragedy that struck, and it was all over the internet that this is what this church did. And I think that there's a point at which, if others, kind of like the scripture says, let others praise you, not you yourself. This group was, look what we did, look what we did, look what we did. And it was parading these good works, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. And I'm sure it did other people as well, because, when religious groups do things and then they parade it, it's kind of like, I don't know if I'm the only person this bothers, but it bothers the crap out of me. Hey, here's Jimmy, and you're taking a selfie of Jimmy. I just told Jimmy about Jesus, and you're posting it on the internet. On so many levels, that's wrong. Number one, Jimmy isn't, he's not your, how am I going to put it? He should not be the poster boy that you've been busy for Jesus. Number two, it's weird. Like, hey, Jimmy, I just shared Jesus with you, but let me do the most shallow thing I can and brag about it online. Like, I always feel sorry for Jimmy. Like, what's going through Jimmy's mind? He's like, dude, this is a Twitter brag, or why are you doing this? Like, that's just bad taste. It's kind of like, hey, I'm in the gym, checking. Instagram just weirds me out. I want nothing to do with Instagram. It just seems like people showing their bodies all the time and bragging. So that's why you'll never find me on Instagram.
That's why you're going to find me on Instagram in about another 50 pounds.
But anyways, that whole idea. And so I don't mind if we do it and we tell those stories, and other people, like Proverbs says, let others praise you, not you yourself. The actual biblical part of it, where it says, don't let your left hand, know what your right hand's doing, because they do these things to be praised by men. Jesus had really strong opinions about when you do something, let it be done in secret. And in this age of social media, it just seems like we can't get that right. Like it's just made us a bunch of Pharisees. And to be quite honest with it, I at times I just go, I'm just going off social media, man. I just don't get it. Like if I'm going and speaking, I don't post all over the internet, hey, I'm speaking here, check me out, I'm speaking. It's like, it's weird, man. Like I'd rather post about the A-team in the 80s, man. But the whole thing is let others praise you, because it's going to be weird. It seems like it's for ulterior motives when you're bigging up yourself and what you do. So don't do that, right? When it hits your city, let the mayor post on social media what you did as a church. Let the citizens do it. And if they don't, fine. At least you comforted the people and there were no ulterior motives, and people aren't looking and going, oh, wow, you think pretty highly of yourself. Oh, you did this and you did that. Great. Good for you. But I don't, I had pain. I had need in my life. I didn't do it so I could become your trophy, So anyways, okay. So what about when, what you were hitting on, it enters your church, and that's where you're bringing up, like, hey, if someone tries to hurt your family, and I'm all the way with you. Like I always think it's sad when God is not a pacifist in the Bible at all. And you look at even Paul's theology, he was not a pacifist. He had some things to say about, hey, this guy bears the sword for a reason. Paul was not, he says he executes God's judgment. There are some things that modern liberal theologians would grapple with and we don't believe in Paul in these things anyways, which is what they usually say. Paul was wrong about all these things. But what do you do when it hits your church? What's your thought, Pete?
It's interesting, and I'm going to take a kind of a side detour here. Again, plugging the From Concealment podcast. I believe it's episode 2. Dan Sams, who's a pastor, church planner in Ohio. I know in episode 1, and it might have been in episode 1 too, I tell one of my recent experiences of being grateful that I had a firearm on me. And he told one of his experiences of not having his firearm on him when he was in an inner city, and a drug dealer was trying to like rope him into a situation with a prostitute where he was afraid for his life. And one of the things that you got to understand about Dan actually works in different countries, planting churches, training guys. Most of the people in his churches are people who have been deported from the United States, who are ex-gang members. And, we're not talking about the fluffy gangs. We're talking about the we kill people gangs. And so both of us are kind of like, we don't know if people are going to actually like our From Concealment podcast, because we are not typical gun guys in the sense that we actually do value life, right? We don't want to just be like, well, if you come after me, I'm going to kill you dead, right? We both are kind of like, well, if I die, I die, it's for us, it's more of protecting our loved ones than ourselves, or, protecting even the general public. But one of the things that he said that to me that was very, very profound is he goes, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, this bad guy right now, he might one day be a brother of mine.
Right. Because
a lot of the guys that he works with, like in Nicaragua and Honduras and stuff like that, there are guys who are now leaders in the church who have killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like it's not they knew something. No, it's like they did it. He knows they did, and now he calls them a brother. You're a brother of mine,
right?
And so there's always that thought, like, we value life. Jesus valued life. Jesus loved Judas till the end. So what do you do when it comes in your church? Well, the way I look at it, most of the churches that you and I go to or are a part of the bulk of the people in there are probably not saved. Like, they're just not. So you come in here and start killing people, you're sending people directly to hell.
Right.
Now, I don't know if you go to like some, I mean, I guess technically right now, the church I go to, I would say that's probably not the bulk of the people in there, which we're still trying to penetrate the community. And when people from the community come, I know they're not saved.
Right.
But, so I would say stop that evil if you can.
Right.
But, but I respect people who are like, I choose not to carry. Right? They're like, I don't want to carry a gun. I respect
that's different.
That.
That's different from someone like I do have a problem with someone who says, hey, I just think we're called to nonviolence and we're called like, no, dude, like you were made a man for a reason. You were given strength, not just to work. You were given strength to defend. I love, what's his name? John. He wrote that Wild at Heart. I can't remember his last name, but that whole idea he brings up that, hey, we were made to fight. Like if you think we weren't made to fight, you're made to fight the enemy as a Christian. Adam was meant to be a protector in the garden. He was meant to shield off Eve, and he failed to do his duty in that. And that's part of his failure, and that's part of the curse that he inherited. But he had a job to do. He had work to do. He had a battle to fight. He had all those things pre-fall, and post-fall it's no different. Well, when you see an evil in the world, why should if I have the power to stop somebody or the opportunity to stop somebody from murdering a child, why would I think that God doesn't want me to do that? To me, that is the weird twist. And I'm just going to say, I think it's twisted. I actually think, because I'll see that through the eyes of a non-believer. And someone might say, oh, well, Peyton, non-believers, you can't use them as No, I'm just saying, I think it, and I know what effect it's having on non-believers when they hear that crap. That really? You would value the life of that person over a child who hasn't even grown? That's bizarre. And then you blame God for that kind of twisted thinking? I'm sorry. That's just weird.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. And so, it's one of those things where I would say, if
like you said, though, that's a real quick, Pete, like one caveat, what you said, though, but that doesn't mean I'm saying everyone should carry a gun. Not saying that at all, because it's that old adage.
I'll say it.
That,
yeah. I'm just kidding.
No, but what I'm saying is, it's kind of like this. We have a military, right? And like I said, the further we get away from these world wars, the more you see people going, oh, well, I don't believe in this. I don't. You have that luxury,
right?
Because someone protects you. You have the luxury of thinking that.
Well, and that was the guy who asked us to do this podcast. He was like, what's your take on all this? And my response was, it's really simple. And stop being the person who calls somebody with a gun and be the person with a gun. Like the only thing that's going to stop a bad guy like that, a mass shooting, is someone with a gun. Everyone knows that on some level. We don't like to admit it, but that's the reason why you call cops. The reason why they come and show up is because they have a gun. Right. Like they're prepared to handle the bad guy.
Right.
And the problem is well, now you've let 60 seconds go by, 30 lives go by. How many people in Gilroy died a couple of weeks back, and the cops were on scene within 60 seconds because it happened at a festival and the cops were already there. And yet something like 12 or 16 people were shot and 3 died. Seconds count. Seconds count.
This is the thing and I know we'll get heat for this podcast because somebody will write and say, hey, I thought better of you. How can you be a Christian? And the question I'd always I came from a military family. I do not personally own a gun, although I was raised in a house full of guns. Here's the deal. The question I always ask people when they take that tack is think this through logically now. Are you trying to advocate that the military is evil? Like, would you stand up and in the name of Christianity blast veterans for being unchristian? Because if you know anything about the early church had Roman soldiers that came to faith. Paul talks about those in the Praetorian Guard. Now, they didn't leave their post as military. They actually continued on. And Paul says they're just saved now, right? And you know, the
same thing with cops.
Right?
Cops carry guns.
Correct. And so now imagine this now that the church in the future is going to put its foot in its mouth. Just imagine this. Church gets out there and says, hey, if you're a policeman and trying to follow Jesus, you're living a contradictory lifestyle. If you're a soldier and you're claiming to be a Christian, you have an inconsistency in your life. That's basically when you're telling me we're having this conversation, that's what you're telling me. And I would ask you, if you're going to write me and tell me that I'm wrong, I ask you to post on social media that you believe that being a soldier or a veteran was contradictory to being a Christian. I will issue that challenge to you because, and I've taken it on the chin when people, okay, I get it. You know, you're welcome to your opinion, but I'm going to push back on this because I think at some point you got to follow this through to its logical conclusion. And I would love to see the reaction that you get and the witness you make when you say that having, just imagine all the soldiers and the good Christians that you know that have served in the military. I grew up in a combat infantry of multi-generations. My great-grandfather was a combat infantry soldier, officer in the Marines. My great-grandfather was in World War II. He was an officer, combat infantry, 101st Airborne. My brother was in multiple conflicts, 82nd Airborne. My stepdad was he was in the Air Force, and he, believe it or not, he guarded a communications outpost in Vietnam, and he was jacked up. He unfortunately saw and did a bunch of things that men often should not be asked. And I will say that. I agree with, what's his face? My favorite author. Gosh dang it. Steinbeck, where he said the reason we give men in the military such awards and accolades and honors is because we ask them to do things men should never be asked to do. Right? And I agree with that 100%. We're asking them to do things, and I've witnessed this firsthand in my loved ones, that jack them up for the rest of their lives. Yep. They are truly making a sacrifice. Now, I dare you to go and tell them that they're unchristian for that. I dare you. So when you have things like, this whole discussion, what we're really talking about is there are sheep and there are wolves, but there are also sheepdogs. And, I would pray that in a situation like this, that every congregation will have some sheepdogs in it.
Well, and that's what it comes down to for me, in the sense that I don't have a problem if somebody's doesn't want to carry, they don't like guns. I get it. Not everyone's like me. And
look at you taking the soft approach on this podcast.
Well, I'm just saying.
I agree. I'm of two minds. I'm half there myself, as you know.
Well, yeah. I'm just like, look, I don't have a problem with that. For me, I don't suffer from that affliction.
Right.
There's the soft part killed. No, but so I'm like, look,
who'd have known this conversation turns out like this?
Right. So I'm going to carry, because it's my responsibility. Like, my wife wants nothing to do with guns. She's never fired a gun. She's not going to carry a gun. That's my wife. Okay, that's fine. That's her. I will carry. I will, play the sheepdog. And you just got to pray that if you're a sheep, your family are all sheep, pray for there to be a sheepdog around you when the time comes. Pray for a guy like me to be around you who will step up and do the awful thing that has to be done. And if you are the person who is the sheepdog or sees himself as, I could be that person, I'm going to be frank with you here. You better train. Having a gun does not mean, oh, you're good. You better spend the time and the money to train, and train a lot. because that is a real responsibility. You know, here in California, we like to say every bullet you fire comes with a lawyer attached to it. Because where did those bullets go? You know, did you make the right call? All of that stuff. You'd better train. And that's me. I take it seriously. I train all the time. I went to a training 2 nights ago. I got a 4-hour training coming up on Saturday. Jamie won't let me go tonight, or there'd be a competition I'd be going to tonight. You got to do that stuff, right? I mean, I go to probably, I do it excessively, but that's because it's also my hobby. I probably go to 5 to 6 times a month. I'm doing something with firearms.
Right. So, and here's the thing, guy. We're not advocating that you be Pete. You know, we're saying,
because you're not. You're a Jamie. You don't have a gun.
Right.
I
need a Pete in my life.
So we don't hang out close enough. Just so we're square, you're a good hour and a half away.
Still trying to get you to move. I'm still trying to get you to move,
dude. I'd move in a heartbeat.
So here's the thing, guys. While you're doing all this defending, Pete, where would you go when you got to do the bookkeeping? You know, when you're doing all this training and yada yada. What do you do?
I'm so grateful that you asked me that, because I would actually use Simplified Church to handle all the payroll, IRS compliance, bookkeeping, workman's comp, website design. And then I'd go to the gun range and train.
Nice. What was that website again?
It was simplifychurch.com.
So, guys, thanks for joining us today. We know this was a deep one. It's sticky. It's messy. I hope, if nothing else, that you appreciate that we were willing to ruffle some feathers. And it's funny because normally Pete and I come out on the opposite side of this, but I'm just a little, sometimes I think what I get a little more passionate about is when the gospel gets misrepresented. And if I were sitting here talking with someone who was telling me that we all need to get guns and carry them, I'd be equally as passionate opposing them on that claim as well. So understand, I'm addressing the extreme pacifist on this, and because I feel it's a misrepresentation of the gospel. I think the gospel allows for the balance on this, and I hate to see people claiming that the scripture claims things it doesn't claim. So with that, guys, thanks for joining us today for the podcast. This has been Peyton Jones and Pete Mitchell reminding you, if you want to reach the ones no one's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.